gentlemen, let's get ready to rumble!
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Political Smackdown. I'm Andy Devin, I'm your host this week, and we got our usual crew with us. And welcome to the new edition of the inauguration of Political Smackdown. We're going to be the source of all your information for inauguration. We're going to do a little something different beginning of this show. We're going to go in depth about the inauguration and all the information that you've always wanted. Well, and you didn't know you wanted to know about it. So we're going to get into it right now. And we're going to start off with Wes. And Wes, could you talk some about what goes on as the two presidents prepare to ride to the Capitol? And let's face it, sometimes it's not a very pleasant thing for a lot of these guys, especially if it was a pretty bad election. Then you have, again, like this last time, President Trump was outgoing president. He didn't even bother to go over there. But usually they do ride together. So tell us a little bit.
Almost without exception, the outgoing president is very congenial to the incoming president. Trump did not do that 4 years ago, which I thought was a mistake. But, you know, Andy, the reality, a presidential election is as close of a thing we have to Mortal Kombat that exists in politics. I mean, Harris in her campaign spent, what, $1 billion?
Yep.
I mean, this is big time. And I can't imagine the emotions, winner or loser, coming into inauguration. They've stewed on this thing since November. They've thought about it. Tried to figure out how to deal with it politely. Of course, we've got Biden doing everything he can to undermine the incoming president. How does the incoming president feel about that, aside from obviously wanting to gloat because he won, as we all would? I don't know. That I'd love to be a fly on the wall when they get together and hear what those conversations are. I am reminded one of the other really contentious elections was when FDR beat Hoover. And it's interesting, picture here, you see the two men sharing a lap blanket as they travel to the inauguration on that cold, at this time it was in March. So you had an extra couple months to stew over these wins and losses. They never spoke to each other. Hoover had spent all the time since losing the election lobbying FDR to take his policies and continue them. And by the time they got to inauguration, the two men couldn't speak to each other. It's amazing to me how for 250 years we have had this transition. We've had the people making a decision who's going to be their leader. It changes every 4 or 8 years with the one exception of FDR, and how common we have come to believe that is. And the reality is, in the history of the world, even in today's world, this is not common. This is uniquely American, and how glorious is that, regardless of who wins or loses.
But don't you believe that's the real reason why we've moved it to January? Because it was such a long, from November to March. Can you imagine?
After the last month of Biden, I think we ought to move it to the day after Election Day.
Oh, Wes,
I do at least think it ought to be the first week of January.
Well, and then we got into it back, if you think about it, when JFK was elected. That was awful weather. I mean, it was an awful snowstorm, and there you had Frank Sinatra's heading up all the festivities, and nobody could come because the weather was so bad.
What president was it that got sick? At inauguration and died a month later.
William Henry Harrison.
Harrison, yes.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot to think about,
You know,
about
Trump
how-
could have suggested they move inauguration to Mar-a-Lago. It won't be cold there.
He may have floated that, I don't know.
He could really select who comes.
He's got plenty of paperwork there if he needs to.
Makes you wonder what he would charge the country for it, too.
Mm-hmm.
But, Bessie, I want you to talk a little bit about what goes on while everybody is at the Capitol and all the swearing in, the speeches and all that. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on. I mean, you've got to have the outgoing president and the family. All that's got to be packed up, shipped out. You've got to have the incoming president and his family guy. You've got to have the West Wing, including the Oval Office, has got to be packed up. It's got to be redecorated, painted, all that. Tell me a little bit what's going on when all this is going on.
Well, Andy, I was so glad when I saw that you had put this down as a question today, because I believe that we need to educate our viewers, and being the school teacher that I am, and I just think it's so interesting. And Wes, I will agree with you on one thing, that it is amazing that our country, that we take for granted, how this transfer of power has been so peaceful between the outgoing president and the incoming president. But you've got a staff at the White House. You've got butlers, you've got janitors, you've got maids, you've got a whole group of people headed up by the chief usher. And so that the chief usher's job he's sort of the general manager of the White House. And so what he does is you will see the van comes in, and when first though the outgoing president will line up and say goodbye to the staff, to the chefs, the ones that have cooked for him. If any of you do not know this, Marty Mangello, who owns the Inn of the Patriot down in Grover, and he has a presidential library. He was one of those chefs for number president. And it's really interesting to go to Grover and see all the stuff Marty's gotten, and to hear about which dishes they liked. But anyway, I think it's amazing, and Andy, you mentioned too that when the West Wing was on, that last episode really showed that. And if any of you have ever seen that movie, The Butler, it talks about, and it's about Eugene Allen, who spent 30 years as a butler through 8 presidents. It shows you how it's clockwork. They have this organized, they load up the truck from the outgoing president, all the belongings, then they move it. And while this is going on, while the speeches and all that, and then they unload it, and then, like you say, they have painted, they put up drapes, and so when the incoming president, when at the end of the day, when they get ready to come in for the luncheon and everything's ready for them to just move right in. Of course, we're talking about things that go into their private quarters. It's not like they have to move everything in the White House. But I just think that it's amazing how they get it all done. And yet it's so effortlessly. You go to a wedding that people have planned for a year, and it's so without fault. And you think, oh, how nice, but you don't realize how much work is behind it to where it goes off so smoothly. So, and I have been to 2 inaugurations. I was at both of Barack Obama's. The first time I had a seat because we went Democratic, and my friend Linda Gunner from Cary was the head of the Electoral College, and we had 2 seats right in front of the podium. I was near Bruce Springsteen, I was Oprah Winfrey, Bill Cosby, Alicia Keys, and Bruce Springsteen is a really short man. But anyway, but it was great. But my son and my daughter-in-law had good standing seats, and they've said, that was so many people there that they'll never go to another one. They'll watch it on TV. Now, the second one I went to, I went to the parade. I did the parade part. It's always so many people, it's hard to do both. But I would, it's great to go. Now, I had considered going back, when Biden was inaugurated, but remember, he told us not to come. We just went after what had happened at the Capitol with the insurrection. So I just think I'm so proud of our country that we can do that. And it's just like what you showed, the picture of FDR and Hoover. these men are not necessarily friends, but I really think that it's good that the outgoing president makes an effort, writes a letter, leaves it in the desk for the incoming president. And I just think that that's one of the strengths of our country.
Well, I went to Bill Clinton's first one, and Dean was party chair, and he headed
That's-
it up with Rutherford County. We had 2 buses, and as Dean called it, it was the trip from hell. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. We had the one bus driver that didn't know where he was going, and Dean said, "How do we get from here to there?" He said, "I don't know." And this was before you had GPS, and we had no idea where we were going.
Well, it's that first time Clinton ran, Andy had a black Cadillac. And in the back window, it had a Bill Clinton sign. And I thought to myself then, and I think today, how could an entrepreneurial real estate broker have a freaking Bill Clinton sign?
I did have a bumper sticker.
It's a head scratcher, that's for sure.
I did. But everything, we didn't even have tickets, and we all separated, went off, and we got over into the congressional offices, and they said, all right, go to all the Republican congressmen. They'll have tickets because none of their people want. So we all went, and it went on and on and on. And finally, we went, us and our closest million friends. We couldn't see it. We could hear it, but we couldn't see anything. And but we went to the presidential balls, and it was fun, and we had fun with all the stuff. Anyway, when we were leaving Washington, and we were just going out, and this car passed us. The thing was on fire. And Dean got hold of the microphone on the PA system, said, "Folks, I had absolutely nothing to do with that car being on fire."
It sounds like Dean.
That was Dean. All right, Mike, tell us a little bit about the actual real transfer of power. Because once it's finally, the oath is taken, the real power is the nuclear football.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that. I'll just mention in background to that, it really wasn't until the 1950s very much public attention was paid to it, according to things I read since you sent this out. And basically, Harry Truman set the stage for these transitions by offering to give briefings to Dwight Eisenhower both before he was elected and after he was elected. But Eisenhower was so mad at Truman, he wouldn't do it till after the election to get the first briefing, because while campaigning for Adlai Stevenson, Truman made the statement that Eisenhower doesn't know any more about politics than a pig knows about Sunday. That was Truman.
That sounds
if you
like
remember
Truman.
Truman's reputation. But anyway, since the years since then, and nuclear power has become a big issue for a good while now, what's called the nuclear football, which is actually a presidential satchel, as you see there, has the contents that are to be used by the president to communicate and authorize a nuclear attack while away from fixed command centers such as the White House Situation Room or the Presidential Operations Center. It's a mobile hub in which the strategic defense system of the United States is carried by military aid. And you can see pictures of all the recent presidents, even if they're going to get in Marine One to go to Camp David, there's an aide with that satchel that stays near the president at all times. And the president has a set of codes, and he has a biscuit. There are 4 things in that thing, basically. It has the retaliatory options available, a book listing of classified site locations, a manila folder with 8 or 10 pages stapled together giving procedural descriptions for the emergency alert system, has a 3x5 card with authentication codes, and the president has one called the biscuit that he can carry on his person that has his codes, and there's multiple ways to make sure that it is the president doing it that they have. I can't get into all of that, but it's fascinating to read about. And so they're always accompanied by that, the presidents are. Now at the end, there are codes for the existing president, like will be this coming week as we tape. And at 11:59:59, President Biden's codes don't work. And at 12 o'clock, President Trump's codes will work, and there'll be one bag that will switch to another, and it'll work. Now, it was a problem when Trump didn't show up 4 years ago because they couldn't have the handoff right there, so they had to have 3. Pence left. Well, Pence was there. The vice president gets one too, and Trump had to take one that was active till 12 o'clock in Mar-a-Lago, but then at 12 o'clock, all his codes quit working. So it's a fascinating thing to read a little bit about, but it's where America could retaliate instantaneously if called upon nuclearly.
Well, and I'm going to real quickly talk about what goes on after we have the actual swearing in. Well, then the new president makes a speech. Then they go in what is called the president's room that's there in the Capitol, where he actually starts to govern. And he signs some proclamations and some executive orders, and then he goes and the First Lady, they go and have lunch with some of the leaders in Congress. And they have, multi-course lunch, and they sit there and they gab and they talk about things. I guess they pat each other on the back on what a good day they've had, this, that, and the other. And then they go and they have a break and rest. They usually go down to the White House and they rest and whatnot. Then they have the parades, and then they go have the ball. And that's pretty much the first day. Well, that's a full day for anybody. Well, folks, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with the second half of Political Smackdown.
I'm Deb Harden, host of For Your Information. The goal of our show is to educate and entertain you about all things pets throughout Cleveland County. We have various guests joining me each month to talk about dogs, cats, pigs, whatever kind of pets you can think of. Also each month, we will be joined by some furry friends looking for their forever homes. For Your Information each month, right here on C19 TV and online at www.c19.tv.
And welcome back to Political Smackdown. All right, let's move on here. There's a lot of talk.
Before we move on,
excuse me.
I just want to add one thing that I find quite interesting. We're going to all watch Monday at noon the president take the oath of office. And every time that happens, it ends with, "So help me God." That's not a part of the Constitution. That's not a part of the presidential oath.
Really?
And the story goes that when Washington was administered the oath of office the first time, he added that in.
And it's never been formally added.
But it is not a part of the Constitution. It is not a
Well.
part of the oath of office. And then 100 years later, essentially, apparently Lincoln did the same thing, and Lincoln bent down and kissed the Bible. But that's not a part of the oath of office, but I think that shows the integrity of the individuals who have traditionally held this office, going back beginning with Washington. And I always find that fascinating as I watch the oath every 4 years.
Well, that is interesting. Okay, let's move on to, I lost train of thought. All right, got it back again. All right, there's been a lot of talk about the position of Elon Musk in the Trump White House. Now, a lot of people say, well, it's almost like he's a co-president. And, you know, and some people really are questioning where is he going to be in the hierarchy. Betsy, I mean, I do hear a lot of people, both Republicans and Democrats, are concerned about this. So what do you think? Where exactly is he going to end up landing in all this? He's basically moved into Mar-a-Lago at this
Yes.
point. So what do you think?
Well, you know, you were talking about the $1 billion that Harris campaign spent. Just think about how many billion that Trump campaign spent, and then you think about the millions that Elon Musk added, and I truly think that his money helped pull Trump over.
Trump's
And-
total with his was 463 million. Hers was 1.5
It was
billion.
a fraction of hers.
Fraction.
Well, moving on, but he still had, and out of that 11 million that Elon Musk gave him, stock or the value of his company went up about like $500 million the day after election. But anyway, going back to, they say he's going to have an office in the Eisenhower wing, the building that's off from the West Wing. Now, Steve Bannon says HELL no. So we'll see what exactly, you know, you're right, Andy. I don't know where his family's been living, probably in some of his states there around the world. But he certainly has been moved in with Mar-a-Lago, and he's right there at Trump's elbow. But I don't think President Trump's going to. He wants to be the big, you know, the one on display. He doesn't like this talk about Elon Musk being the shadow president. So that's going to be, but let's face it, you've got all of these billionaires, the oligarchy, that talking about the intense amount of wealth that's being concentrated into these few people around Trump, and how that's not going to be good for the average American people. So we'll see, Andy. It's going to be interesting.
Wes?
It took her 2/3 of that paragraph to get to the word oligarchy. I'm surprised that you went that far, Betsy.
Well,
I thought that'd be the first sentence.
I guess I surprised you.
Well, you did. I think this is a red herring. You know, Soros was obviously in Biden's pocket. A lot of influential people are close to presidents and have influence. They want to do what is going to be good for them, for their business. I think they generally want to do what's going to be good for the country. This is just a non-issue. The fact of the matter with this Doge group, you've got to have people that are not going to be influenced from the outside, that can go in and actually make some cuts and help get the country back on track. I'm not at all concerned about it, and I'm quite glad to see Zuckerberg and all these other people who have, by their own stated admission, been influenced by Biden to define a narrative online, now saying we're not going to do that anymore.
And
Thank goodness we're finally getting control of some of this stuff.
Zuckerberg told last week he had people in the Biden administration calling him during COVID, trying to make him take down things that they knew were true, because
Yep.
they didn't fit the narrative.
Yep.
well, you know,
That's a
it's
whole lot
amazing.
more scary than Musk.
I think Musk is going to be a key advisor. I think he's going to be greatly disappointed in how hard it is to cut government spending.
I agree.
It's going to be very difficult.
Well, my question is the presidential limo going to be a Tesla now?
Will he have, you know, a
I
seat on
doubt
Air
it.
Force
It'd
One?
probably blow up.
I promise you that Trump is not likely to ride in an electric car.
Oh, I don't know. As much as he owes Elon Musk, yeah, he probably will. They'll probably have a special one built for him.
It's a fraction of what Soros has put
Oh,
in
and I-
to
you know-
destroy the country with anti-American policies from San Francisco to New York.
For our viewers that don't know George Soros, he is a very wealthy man who contributes a lot of money to different causes, and he is a
They're
person
different, that's for sure.
No, it's more than just politics. But I don't ever remember George Soros jumping around on stages showing his belly like Elon Musk did at a Trump rally. No, you don't see. You say it's the same thing. It is not. It is not.
I don't think you ever smoked pot on a radio show.
Well, probably not.
Anyway, let's move on to our next question real quick. Vice President-elect J.D. Vance this week seemed to be walking back a little bit this talk of pardoning all the January 6 prisoners. Now he says all the felons will not be pardoned, especially violent ones. Even though this may sound reasonable, how will this fly with the MAGA crowd, Mike?
Well, for Vance to say that this week, and I saw some of that and read about it, he's got to have talked to Trump or he wouldn't be saying he was representing Trump. So undoubtedly, level heads have said to Trump, the ones that were not violent, didn't hurt anything, yeah, take a look at those. But the ones that violent, you need to put those on the back burner and you need to really know you're doing the right thing. So I think it'll be moderated over what originally it sounded like it could have been.
Betsy?
I'm watching to see what he does. You know, this was a big thing in the confirmation hearing with the lady that wants to be Secretary, the Attorney General. So I'll just wait and see. We know what Trump said, and let's see what exactly comes about.
Wes?
I don't know that I can add anything. I think it will be moderated. I think the violent actors should be dealt with and should be dealt with harshly, but the vast majority were not violent and were caught up in something.
All right, let's go to our lightning round. All right, Betsy, what you got?
President Biden has got a few more days to tell his archivist to publish the Equal Rights Amendment. It's been passed by the states, and this would put women in the language of the Constitution, and I hope he does it.
Wes?
Well, as wildfires continue to rage and urban fires continue to rage in California, Gavin Newsom called a special session of the California General Assembly to Trump-proof California. Andy, I think it's time we Democrat-proof California.
How do you do that?
Just let them keep
I
having
can take
wildfires.
care of it.
All right. Michael?
Well, North Carolina is fortunate to now have the first GOP woman to be the rules chair in the U.S. House of Representatives. Virginia Fox, who just finished 18 years, served 10 years in the NC Senate before that, when you used to tell me she was one tough lady, to put it nicely.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
But, you know, this is an interesting committee. It's the Speaker's committee. And even though they are closely divided, this has 9 majority party and 4 minority party on it, regardless of who's in power, because it's considered a 2-to-1 committee that the majority keeps control of what goes to the floor. But our own North Carolina rep will determine more or less what goes to the floor for 2 years.
Isn't that interesting?
And most recently
Isn't that
represented us
scary?
in Cleveland County. We were part of her district.
Yep, just for a little bit. Well, folks, here's a little something that's interesting I found. Do you know that the new president has to be sworn in on the 20th? What do you do if the 20th falls on a Sunday? They have to be sworn in on the 20th, and it has to be done on the 20th, whether it's a Sunday or not. It has to be done privately, and then you have the ceremonial on the 21st. I found that to be very interesting. So that's all we got this week. Hope you have learned a little something, and we'll be back again next week with a new edition of Political Smackdown.